Welcome back to the Swipe Savvy podcast brought to you by CreditVerse, where we talk about all things credit cards. Today, we're switching it up a little bit. I'm not joined by my usual co-host, Alian. Today, I'm joined by my friend, Eric. Now, Eric has what we could call an average knowledge on credit cards, and we're going to put that to the test today by doing a little bit of an interview, seeing what the average consumer thinks, and hopefully shed some light on a try-hard credit card user, if you'll call it that. So let's get started by, why don't you introduce yourself, Eric?
Yeah, my name's Eric. I'm a fourth-year student at Western. I study business, but happen to not know as much about credit cards as I probably should.
Okay. Now, basic question to start off. What credit card do you use on a daily basis?
I use one provided by Scotiabank. I think it's the student one.
Okay.
There is one.
Do you know if you get cash back or points?
I get cash back.
Okay. It's a good start. And is that your only credit card?
That is my only credit card.
Okay. Why did you choose to get that credit card?
In all honesty, because my bank guide told me that this is a credit card that I can use. And
Okay.
I happen to be at Scotiabank.
So I feel like that's something that we see often. People just open up a bank account when they turn 18, get the cashback card that's associated with that bank, and honestly, that's not a bad way to go. Gives you pretty decent rewards, but it certainly doesn't maximize those rewards. So have you ever considered stepping up, getting a new credit card, getting a different credit card? Have you ever thought about looking into that?
I haven't started looking at different credit cards, but I know some give you points. For example, some might give you scene points or other types of points. Yeah.
So that's never been a priority?
No.
Okay, how come?
That's actually a good question. I think it's just I felt like the credit card sort of worked for me. And I think it's just the feeling of like the amount of work that it takes to learn about these new credit cards, and yeah, just having like more on your mind, I guess, and just keeping it simple is probably why.
So I guess from an outsider's perspective, maybe this whole world of credit cards seems daunting, scary, complex, or just too much time has to go into it to make it worth it.
Yeah, I would say complex is probably the right word to use. And it's also maybe one of those like paradox of choice moments where there's just so many credit cards to choose from where I'm like, I might as well just stick with what I have.
All right, now that we got that out of the way, I'm going to give you a little test. See what you actually know about credit cards, and then hopefully that'll shed some light on the overall kind of landscape of financial literacy in Canada and how it's in a poor state.
Fair.
What's the difference between a credit card and a debit card?
So my understanding is when you pay something with your debit card, it takes money straight from your bank account and gives it to whoever you're paying. With a credit card, my understanding is there's like a company sort of in the middle who like pays it first, and then you have like about a month to pay that company back. So it gives you, and so the credit limit is like how much that sort of person in the middle is willing to pay before you need to pay them back.
That's a pretty good definition. Now, beyond the fact that when you use a credit card, you're not technically using your money at that specific point in time, do you know of any other benefits for using a credit card over a debit card?
I guess one thing might be the different types of points that you can get. I'm actually not sure if that varies significantly between credit and debit card. I guess, yeah, the main thing is you just wouldn't be paying the thing immediately, and you can pay it back after. Something else that probably is a benefit with credit cards is the fact that because the money's not going straight out of your bank account, if it gets like stolen and somebody decides to buy a bunch of things, that amount of like money is being paid by that company or like that person in the middle before the money is like taken out of your bank account.
Yeah, that's solid. I mean, fraud protection is a pretty big reason why people use credit cards because, like you said, debit card straight out of your bank account, there's limited protection there, but with the credit card, you have more backing and protection. Yeah, you talked about points. More often than not, you don't earn any kind of rewards with debit cards. Credit cards, you have the option to earn cash back or some sort of points. I think those are pretty much the main benefits there. So, kind of moving into the reward space. I think you know what cashback is because you've had a cashback credit card. What would you define that kind of point space as?
What do you mean by define the points?
What's your understanding of that? Like, how does it work?
How do points work?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so my understanding is something along the lines of like, if you spend a certain amount or as you spend, to incentivize that sort of spending, credit card companies would give you points that can be transferred to other things later on. It could be like partnerships that they have with different companies. So for example, my understanding of scene points is you could gather enough to go watch a movie, go to a restaurant, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's pretty solid. So I think the beauty of points is there's so much possibility there. So yeah, you have Scene Points as an example. Scotiabank, a lot of their credit cards earn Scene Points. You have Aeroplan branded cards where you can earn Aeroplan points for flights and other things like that. I think the world of points and rewards is so vast and diverse. And I think you kind of just demonstrated a lot of people don't understand how big that is and what kind of possibilities are out there. And I think that's something that we're aiming to do with CreditVerse is to spread that knowledge and awareness. All right, let's shift the focus to you as a person. It's a loaded question, so take it as you will. What do you want in life? What do you want to achieve? What are some of those goals that you want to hit?
Yeah, I guess in terms of personal finance, it does at the end of the day center around how you want to shape your life, right? And I can imagine that, like, you know, if you like to travel a lot, maybe the Aeroplan that you mentioned is the way to go. Maybe if you're someone who likes to enjoy, you know, going out for dinner weekly, maybe something like Scene Points might be something that's attractive as an option. I think for myself, I definitely do want to travel in the next few years, but obviously it can be expensive to do that as well. So yeah, perhaps something to do with traveling.
Is there a specific destination that you had in mind?
I think for me personally, I do want to explore the States a bit more, but then also some countries in Europe, like the Netherlands I haven't been to, Germany. There's a few countries there that I do want to explore as well in the next few years.
Well, speaking to your aspirations to travel around the US, that's something that I've kind of done over the past year, 2 years, just taking trips down south and exploring. So the way I do it personally is I have my American Express Cobalt card. It's a pretty cheap card, but a pretty strong card. It has a monthly fee of $12.99, so about $150 annual fee. And basically what I do, every purchase that I can, I just spend on that card and I earn membership rewards points. Now, those are American Express's point currency, if that makes sense. And using those points, you can do multitude of things with them. You can either redeem them for kind of items on your statement. So they're worth about 1 cent per point, I want to say, and you can just kind of cover payments on your credit card. That's option A. You can redeem for gift cards or forms of merchandise. Like I think I saw a kettle on their website the other day. Not the most ideal way, but that's an option. And then you can transfer to other partners. So the only partners that I've transferred to are Marriott for hotels and then Aeroplan for flights. And that's pretty much all I do with my points. I kind of get them, and whenever I want to book a flight, I'll check how many points it costs and transfer that many points to Aeroplan and book that flight.
Yeah, and then just a question about that. So that option A that you mentioned of, you know, having points to cover your statements, is that essentially almost cash back in a way because it
Exactly, yeah.
transfers?
And like I said, it's valued at 1 cent per point. So you're essentially, every point is like 1%. So depending on how you use your points for travel, it's more often than not more efficient. You're earning a higher cent per point. But, if I don't know, if you spent a lot of money in a month, it might be worth it to cover some of those expenses. But in general, that's how it works. And that's how I've been able to explore the US, is literally very simple. Using that one card, collecting the same points currencies, transferring it to Aeroplan, and booking those flights. So does that make sense? Do you have any questions on that?
Yeah, so I think you mentioned the monthly fee, the $12.99, and so I think something that kind of makes me hesitant towards like looking into credit cards is because it seems really complicated to know which cards bring you the most value, because you're paying this monthly fee but you get rewards. So how do you have any advice on how to like wrap your head around whether or not a card is worth it, and perhaps like if it involves spending more, if there's any tricks to go around that without unconsciously spending more?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think that's probably the main reason a lot of people don't spend that kind of time researching credit cards, is they see an annual fee and it's an out-of-pocket expense, or at least that's what it seems like. And they kind of shy away from that because they don't, the value that comes from a credit card. Yeah, sometimes you go on a page and it's like, oh, your welcome bonus is worth $1,300, right? But like, how do you actually get that value? They're not giving you $1,300. So I think that's definitely the most daunting part, and the main reason people don't kind of do that research and put in that effort. So with the Cobalt, for example, and I guess I'll break it down more generically, it all comes down to your personal spending habits and how you use the points. So for the Cobalt, it earns 5 times points on dining and groceries, that kind of category. Mm-hmm. And that's where the majority of my spend is. So that's where I see the value in that card, because I'm earning kind of the maximum amount of points you can with that card. But even if you're earning 5 times the amount of points, like, are you still breaking even on that monthly or annual fee? That all depends on how you use the points. If you use it for those statement credits, which I talked about, you might have a more difficult time breaking even because you're earning 1 cent per point, which is kind of that lower value. Mm-hmm. If you redeem it for travel and you kind of maximize how you're redeeming it, then you're probably, or more likely than not, going to kind of break even on that fee. The other aspect is how much you're spending, which is something you brought up. And, especially as students, we're kind of always on a budget. So reaching for that higher card with the higher fee, it's just going to naturally be more difficult to break even. So one way to kind of assess that is by assigning specific cent per point values on different redemptions, and then deciding what you want to redeem for, just for the purpose of that exercise. So let's say you want to redeem for travel and you think you can get 2.5 cents per point back on average. So you use that as kind of your output. And then most of these sites, and even CreditVerse, slowly rolling out calculators on our card pages where you can kind of input your spend and it'll output how many points you'll earn based off your spend in different categories, give you that points value, and then you can kind of subtract that from the annual or monthly fee, and it'll give you an idea of whether you're going to break even, whether that card is worth it for you. Now, that does simplify the process, but obviously your spending isn't static. It's going to change over time. Your rewards, or what you want out of those points, is going to change over time. So it's really hard to give a definitive answer on whether you're going to break even on a specific card. But I think as we kind of grow, as we head into graduation and into our careers, it'll be easier to kind of get those cards with those fees, less daunting, and you'll be more certain that the benefits are worth it. But I think in general, that is not necessarily a problem, but a barrier to entry with this market, is that the rewards are often very undefined in their value. Even, with the American Express Platinum card, for example, you get lounge access. Some people really appreciate that if they fly a lot. Some people don't fly at all, and they won't appreciate that benefit, so it's not worth the $700 or $800 annual fee that's attached to that card. So it's all about how you as a person value the benefits that come with the card, and more often than not, there's no specific monetary value assigned to it. And even if there is, like with the gold card, the American Express gold card, for example, you get $100 travel credit per year. But if you don't travel in a year, then you can't really subtract that from the annual fee that you're paying because you're not really using it. And yeah, so like those are kind of the factors to consider when deciding whether you're going to break even on the card. And that's more often than not why people don't put in that effort, because it's such an uncertain space. And I think that's what we're trying to do with CreditVerse, is to break it down in its simplest terms, make it very easy to understand so that it's less daunting, and people feel more comfortable doing that initial research, because like we've talked about, there's so many benefits. The benefits truly outweigh the effort that goes into it. And with my approach specifically, I put very little effort into my credit card portfolio, and it's worked out in a way where I'm able to kind of travel. So yeah, I think that's the long-winded answer to your initial question.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think, once that calculator rolls out, I think it'll help a lot of folks like myself to be able to, take any given credit card and at a glance understand whether or not it's in the ballpark of what we would consider being something that's worth it.
Eric, I hope you've learned something from this kind of chat that we've had. Before we wrap it up, maybe not today, but in the near future, will you reconsider your credit card portfolio? Will you kind of take some steps to explore the market, at least see what's out there, see if there's, a better option for you? Is there something that you've taken out of this chat today that makes you want to explore that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think after this chat, it actually got me excited about credit cards, because it makes me realize that it can be a very useful tool to be able to, almost afford the kind of lifestyle that you want and be able to achieve the goals that you want. If it's points that can help you travel more easily, experience the city and the dining scene more easily, I think those are all great reasons why it's worth exploring. And I feel like not exploring it would just, close some of those doors that could have easily been opened.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like it's a missed opportunity to not take advantage of what's already out there. And I'll leave you with one kind of piece of advice surrounding credit cards is don't get carried away. Spend within your means. It's oftentimes, especially when you're new to it, you see a welcome bonus. Oh, you have to spend, if you spend $1,000 in every month for the first 3 months, you'll hit this major milestone. You'll get a ton of points. But if you don't spend $1,000 a month, then you're just overspending just to hit that bonus, and then you're gonna end up in a situation where you can't pay off that card, and that's not the place you want to be. Mm-hmm. So spend within your means. The way I like to think of it is just treat your credit card like a debit card, and if you do that, then you'll have no issues. So yeah, I'll leave it at that, and stay tuned, because Alian will be sitting down with one of his friends to do a kind of similar interview, shed some light on a different perspective, different goals, different habits. But yeah, we'll leave it at that. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you, Eric, for joining.
Thank you.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Swipe Savvy podcast. Today we have something a little bit different for you guys. We thought it'd be very interesting to see what the mind of an average consumer looks like when they're thinking about their credit card strategy, and not somebody who has 17 or 18 credit cards sitting around in their wallet. So here we have Sherry, who has really kindly joined us on this Saturday morning. So thanks for joining us, Sherry. If you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and a bit about your strategy and kind of your thoughts around personal finance, we can get started there.
Yeah, for sure. So currently I am a fourth-year student in university. My background is that I've worked a few internships in consulting. Will probably end up in consulting post-graduation. And currently I don't really have a credit card strategy. I was given a student credit card package with that had a savings account, a basic credit card. All when I started university, they set me up and they were like, come back to us in 5 years, here's your student package. Mm-hmm. But post-grad, I feel like I'll be doing a lot of traveling, probably more cognizant of how much I'm spending. Will probably be spending more on average than I am as a student. So there's definitely some goals I want to achieve with credit cards. I just have no idea how to get there, I guess.
No, that's fair. And I think that's what this podcast is really there for. And I think we want to really get into the mind of like, everyone can do it. I think a lot of people start out with just a like student banking package, and that's kind of the bank strategy, right? We talk a lot about strategy in our classes. The bank strategy is like, oh, we want to get you up with a student package. It'll be free, but then when you make real dollars, we'll maybe to a real account, and then you'll go get like, I'm not sure what credit card you have right now, but like the Visa Infinite version, that you can like get a couple of more perks, and then you have to start paying them. So that's kind of how the bank strategy works. Student cards are just like a bit of a loss leader for them. Based on the fact that you have a student card, I'm guessing it's like a cashback card of some sort.
Yeah, it's the CIBC dividend cashback credit card.
Gotcha.
Like the most basic CIBC card they could offer.
No, that's fair. But I think honestly that's the best student card that kind of exists, at least out of the big 5 banks. So you're on the right track there. But have you done any research at all about like, what kind of cards you want in the future, or you're just kind of like out there thinking, I want to travel with points, I just don't really know how?
I haven't really done any research yet, but I guess some of my priorities would be, I guess the job I'm looking at is going to have a lot of traveling.
Sure.
Travel that I likely could book on my own credit card. And so, if, the firm's going to reimburse me for the money that I'm paying, I might as well either get cash back or points for that.
Right.
I'm looking at a lot of like sitting in airport lounges or like airports, and if that experience could be made nicer by having like credit card perks, that would be something I'm interested in.
Gotcha.
I've always been hesitant to like look into cards that have annual fees, but I also recognize that sometimes those annual fees are easily offset based on how much you're spending per year or based on your like lifestyle habits. And so those would be things I'm interested in. So that's kind of where my head's at.
Gotcha. I think that's a really fair point. I think a lot of people think about like the annual fee portion where they're like, oh, do I want to pay $120 or $140 a year? Like as a student, that $140, that means something, right? Like that's like, that's like a month of groceries. Exactly. So you're really thinking like, how do I find out if it's worth it? And that's actually some of the things we thought about when we started CreditVerse as well, is like, I travel a lot because I have to go back between home and school quite a lot. So it makes sense for me to get a points card to pay like $250. But like, what's the time, like how much do we need to spend, or how much am I really getting out of these perks to make it make sense? So I think a lot of banks have like calculators on their site to like see how much you'd have to spend to offset it. But another thing they don't really have is like, how much are these perks worth to you? So on CreditVerse, we have like a perks calculator. So you can actually just put in like, oh, I go to like, let's say, if you're traveling once a week for work, and you go to a lounge once a week, let's call it. I'm going to use 50 lounge passes. Really an extreme case, but like, 50 lounge passes, I'll probably save $10 or $15 every time I go to a lounge, because I don't need to eat food. They have like good Wi-Fi. I can just like sit, have like a nice like drink, and work instead of like sitting in an airport terminal. So you can do it like times 15, and you can see how much value that's going to bring to you. And then other cases, it could be like, how much is it worth for me to like skip security every single time? Which, you go at Pearson, so that can make a bit of a difference, especially on like...
At Pearson, yeah.
Yeah, at Pearson it gets pretty bad. So we made one of those tools on CreditVerse, so that's the thing that we really thought was important for the average consumer, because, again, it's really hard to value a lot of these things, because when the bank says it, it's like, you're going to save like $1,500 with lounge access. Like, I don't know if lounge access is worth $1,500 to me every single year, but it could be to you. So that's a really good point, and I think that's something everyone needs to kind of think about, but we try to make it a bit easier on our site, at least. Not to make this sound like an ad, but if you are looking for a card, or you're trying to see if it's worth it with the annual fee, we do have a calculator built in where you can put in your spending, so it'll tell you how many points you're going to get and the value of those points, and then you can also put in like how much value you can get out of each perk. Another thing we talk about is like Nexus, for example, which helps you like skip security lines, and also helps you like get into the US a bit easier. So
I did have a question about, like trying to get points versus trying to get cash back. Because one of the things that has made me hesitant about points is that I've also worked in banks and on projects related to banks historically, and I know that the value of the points is something that can be made relatively subjective by the bank. Like they can change how much a point is worth pretty much on a whim, or how you earn points pretty much on a whim, versus cashback seems a little bit more like tangible, so I guess, do you have any thoughts there about what that looks like?
Yeah, so I mean, you're definitely right, where like points are this like de facto currency effectively, and the bank is like the government in this case. They can do whatever they want. They can devalue your points by 50% overnight if they really feel like it. Usually, I think banks have their hands a little bit tied just because they have a lot of external partnerships as well. Where like, okay, for example, if you have like American Express MR points, they're not gonna like tank the value of these points because it would then upset a lot of their partnerships, and they're just it is yeah exactly it is terrible for customer loyalty. So there is definitely like a devaluation with points. I would say it's probably about double inflation, so like 5% a year is about pretty fair to assume. But then, for example, certain programs just get wiped out completely. Like Air Miles has definitely gone down an unfortunate path in the past several years, where the points have gone devalued quite a bit, and what you can do with the points also gets limited. So one way to avoid the points getting limited so much is getting a transferable points currency as opposed to like a non-transferable points currency. So it's pretty much like something like Aeroplan would be like a non-transferable points currency. Just because if you get the CIBC Aeroplan card, for example, you only earn Aeroplan points. Like the only way you can redeem them is through Aeroplan itself. Versus if you get like RBC's in-house points currency called Avion, you can either redeem it on like their own portal, but then you can also like transfer your points to WestJet or transfer them to like British Airways, where you can book a lot of other like cool experiences. So that does lower the risk a little bit, but then you're also stuck with like one extra complication in how to use your points. What we kind of recommend, I would say, is like American Express membership reward points, just because they are the strongest and they have the most transfer partners. So from a risk perspective, that's how you avoid a lot of that risk. Cashback, as you mentioned, is like relatively stable. So if you want to keep it really simple, like cashback is definitely the way to go. But if you're willing to put in a little bit more work, taking maybe a bit more risk, you can get better value out of points, especially if if some of your goals are like you want to travel a lot to like places far away, and I'm assuming you're going to have relatively high spend as a result of like getting reimbursed for a lot of the things. So getting a card that has a higher annual fee but will get you like a lot of points on certain transactions may make sense, because you'll be able to offset that with a lot of the experiences you'll be able to redeem for.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Are there any experiences in particular you want to go on, or any? We talk about like any airline products you want to fly, but I think that's a very niche question to ask.
Yeah. Like ideally, post-grad life is working a lot, but then having 2 vacations a year for approximately 1 week each, because you can never leave the office for too long without having a crisis of, crisis of capitalism. But the idea would be like to be able to travel for myself and maybe like my partner twice a year. One time a little bit further, one time a little bit more relaxed. Like my vision would be like in winter we travel to like a warm tropical place and lie on the beach for a week. And then in the summer we go somewhere interesting that's a little more walky, hikey, like sightseeing, tourism, more of that classic, like I'm exploring a new city. If I could do that for 10 years, then I think I'll be ready to settle down by 32.
That's fair. I think that's I think that's a pretty like fair thing to do. My thoughts are like fairly similar, where like it's hard getting away from the office. And 2 weeks, like 2 trips a year, 2 weeks is like pretty fair. That's kind of what I target for as well. Like I'm at the beginning of the summer or the beginning of the year, I look at like how many points do I think I'm going to earn here? And of course, like I go a bit further where I'll get a bunch of bonuses, so I can take a lot of these like funky, weekend trips even perhaps, which is going to be hard to do in post-grad. But I think 2 trips is a fairly like decent thing to do, and especially if you have like you're playing in 2-player mode effectively, you have a partner who also would like to get into the world of miles and points. So I think it's very easy to get those like 2 trips for free with points. Like I know you're going to DR, or no, you're going to it's DR in a couple of weeks. So like that trip technically could have been booked on points, but I think it's something you can go looking forward, and maybe you can get some pretty cool experiences. I talked to Lena yesterday. She was like, oh, I got this like amenity kit from one of the trips I flew on, and it was like I had my name on it. And Lena was like, oh, I really want this cool thing. And I was like, just get some points, book like one business class flight with 1 bonus, and then have some fun with it. You get a little reward package with like a toothbrush and some like cologne. And
things you would not bring on
things no, never. I would never bring toiletries on a kit. That would be unacceptable.
Okay, I have another question. So you mentioned something about like I'm in a 2-player game, which I am. I have a very loving boyfriend and I have a cat. So in that situation, like what would you recommend? Like is there any thought behind like if you're in a relationship, like should you optimize differently for points? Should you like get 2 different credit cards? I guess for some additional context, like me and my boyfriend, we got a we both have CIBC MasterCards because we had Costco memberships, and they were doing a deal where in year one you'll get, the price of the like annual fee refunded, and you'll also get the Costco membership and a bunch of other like welcome bonuses as a student. And then we ended that because we didn't get the welcome bonus again. We were like, this is not worth it. But I don't know. Do you have any advice for like couples who are like looking at credit cards, and if there's any decisions to be made there?
Yeah, I think one thing that I think about when, like, if you're playing in a two-player mode is, like, cross-referring between American Express cards. So Amex cards have, like, a refer a friend option, and your friend just can't be yourself. That's the only rule.
Amazing.
So what a lot of people do is, like, you can get, like, the first person gets the first credit card, and then you cross-refer across all the time. So you'll get the maximum referral bonus as you, like, go down the ladder.
Okay.
But it also kind of depends on, like, what, like, how committed are you to taking these trips, and like how committed are you to like doing this soon? Because my philosophy with points is like earn and burn, because as you said, like devaluations can happen all the time, like, and it's not even just devaluations that can happen. It could be, for example, partners like pulling out of a program, or like Air Canada, for example, changing the entire way they go about pricing. So before there was like fixed pricing, so you knew exactly how many points it took to get from one place to another. Aeroplan, like within their own like planes, for example, now have switched it to like dynamic pricing. So it could be, instead of me knowing it's 10,000 points to go back to Edmonton, now it could be between 6,000 and 15,000. So you play a bit of a game there. And sometimes it can be like 35,000. So a bit of a risk. But then the Air Canada has like other partners, for example, like if you want to fly to Europe, you have like, Lufthansa, which is a German airline. You have Swiss, which is part of the Lufthansa group, like Brussels Airlines. There's a bunch of other ones in there, like TAP Air Portugal, which are all very cool experiences. But you don't know how these partnerships work. Like, I don't know the back end. I have no more information than you would on, like, this is all conjecture. Please do not clip this. Will Lufthansa pull out of this arrangement in 3 years' time because they realize that, hey, we're not really getting a lot of value out of this partnership. Like, there's no real reason. Because like, from a consumer point of view, it's, like, fantastic that you have all these partners. But for an airline, their margins are so low already. Like they're in the business of making money somehow, and these partnerships have to be valuable for them as well. And on the public side, you only get to see like, oh, Lufthansa released award space, which means you can book it with points, but you don't really get to see a lot of the background where like, oh, this is how much they're paying per seat mile flown. So that's kind of a risk you take as well. But that's where like getting to something that's a transferable points currency might make a little bit more sense in terms of like. Yeah, I think that's kind of the thing. If you want to get transferable points currency, you can transfer it out, lower risk a little bit. But then also another thing I would do is like look at what I want to fly, or like look at all the things I want to do. Like for example, one thing I really want to fly is like I want to go to Finland, and you can go from like JFK to Finland in like Finnair's business class, which is like instead of like a regular business class, you like live fly. It's like a couch. It's called the Sky Lounge. So it doesn't recline. You just like you have this massive seat that's like made of nice fabric, and it's like a nice like cocoon because it's sound isolated, and you like sit in there and it's super comfy. And I want to fly that product, for example. So like I can optimize for like I want to fly this, and I will make sure my partner also has enough points to fly this specific route if I want to fly with them. So I would just chart out like what do you want to do, and then work backwards from there. Yeah, but that's a really good question. I think that's something we don't really focus on a lot on the channel, just because like. We just assume like everyone plays in one player mode, but there's definitely like I guess synergies you can have. But we do love synergies here. There's definitely synergies you can have when you have an additional player, because then, for example, both of you don't need a card that has lounge access. If you're going to fly together all the time, like one of you can pay the higher annual fee, and one of you can get like a card that earns a lot more points instead of having a lot more features, and you can put them both together where you can both earn a lot of points and then get all the perks. Yeah. So that's kind of how you do end up optimizing it. Of course, like I don't know what your exact like spend threshold looks like, or like what exactly your like goals are. I think that's a good place to start. I think putting into an Excel sheet and going like, okay, this is how many this is how much money I spend in a month. This is how much I project to spend, and this is how much I'll be able to like get out of it and go from there. Like I know you mentioned you want to go to like Europe next year while we're all on exchange, so you can come visit us. And would it not be like cool to just like not pay for that with real dollars and pay for it with fake dollars, and then get a like pretty fun experience out of it too. So that was kind of my thought at the beginning of the year. It was like, oh, this is gonna be a long year, but I know I'm going away for 4 months, so let's create this like war chest of points, and then I can book some like pretty funky routings and like have a little bit more fun, take a bit of a detour in getting to home.
The scenic route.
The scenic route, yeah. The scenic route through Dubai to go to Copenhagen is
wild.
fun. Yeah, but that's something you can definitely do. I think this is a very points-heavy podcast, but outside of the points realm, are there any things in like personal finance you'd like to also do in the next like couple of years, or do you have any goals set out there?
So I do have a few financial goals. They're a little bit ambitious. My goal is to be able to buy a house very soon after post-grad, like ideally under 5 years, because we know the state of the housing market.
We do.
And it gets worse every year. So the thing about that is I've never seen credit cards really as part of that equation. I have savings accounts. I have like first home savings account, FHSA, TFSA maxed, like all of that is in a state that I'm very happy about. But yeah, would you say credit cards is part of the equation? Do you have any thoughts there?
I think credit cards are part of the equation, but it's a very, very small part. I think for me it's a larger part because my life goals are currently like very travel focused. Like of course I would like to a house and all the other fun jazz. But like for the next couple of years, like I want to travel as much as I possibly can. And I think credit cards get me closer to that than anything else really would.
Sure.
But long term it's just one of those like it's one of the pieces in the like a huge puzzle. And of course like the FHSA is definitely a much larger piece in this puzzle, and savings accounts and investing accounts outside of the FHSA are really the way to go. I think it's really good that you've started already, because I think there's a lot of value in starting just even 1 or 2 years earlier, because it's a compounding effect, right? And you can get a lot more out of your money by just being like, okay, cool, instead of using my internship money on like trying to think of what you do with your internship money, buy a Louis Vuitton purse. I can instead go and put it into my FHSA.
I guess where I see credit cards playing in then would be if I can use my daily spending or my habitual spending to get points to cover travel costs, then I don't have to allocate travel costs out of savings to go travel. So maybe that's where it will help me in my attempts to get a house by 25.
I think it's definitely an ambitious goal, but I think you have all the pieces set, right? It's just like kind of going through the motions, pushing, like digging a bit deep for the next several years, and then hopefully you'll have a nice house to show for it at the end. But I think that's a really good way to look at it, where you want to, it's all opportunity cost, right? Like instead of those $10,000 I'd spend on my 2 trips or whatever the math ends up being, I can now allocate this to my FHSA. So I think that's probably the way to go. When you like invest in your FHSA or your TFSA, do you have a strategy there? Are you like stock picking? Or you're
I'm
just
not
like,
stock picking. I only invest in one ETF. Nice. And it's like the ETF that tracks the S&P 500.
Nice.
And that's it.
Nice. Honestly, that's like, we don't do recommendations on CreditVerse because this is not financial advice. But I think a general guideline is like, you can't beat the market. Like as an individual, it's hard to repeatedly beat the market over a long period of time. That being like, it's nice to have like a little sandbox that you can have of like,
try
fun
something.
money. Exactly. Like try something. Like my Facebook position is what you call in my sandbox, because it was 70% down at some point in this life, and now it's Facebook decided that they want to start making money again, so it's now up a bit. But keeping like the vast majority of your actual investments and like long-term savings in an account that would in a I guess ETF that would definitely lower your risk and increases your upside the most is probably the way to go.
I guess the main reason for that also is like in the past few internships I've been at, they're all client-facing internships, and so if you have any individual stocks, you have to declare them.
I see.
And so I was like, I'm not going to go through the paperwork of like declaring 30 stocks.
That's fair.
I will just only invest in ETFs because then I don't have to do any paperwork, which is a little bit silly, but I think it makes sense in my position, because I don't actively go about thinking, what stocks will necessarily beat the market. And I kind of want to have a set it and forget it strategy. I think it's like, I mean, I'm not someone who likes to play with my money as much.
Sure.
I know my boyfriend does a little bit. He has a little bit of a fun fund in his Wealthsimple account.
Yes.
I'll let him do that.
Yeah, no,
Like I'm just like, oh, my money is here and it's growing a little bit every day.
Yeah.
And that's great. That's all I need.
No, I think that's perfect. Honestly, I think it's good you have to do paperwork because it saves you from it saves you from yourself going,
Like, ooh.
I think I'm smarter than the average individual, and then you go out
Yeah.
and you can get into some trouble pretty quickly. So
Yeah.
maybe it's a blessing in disguise that you're
Mhm.
limited in the things you can buy. Would you think that's actually like, is that actually like an annoyance to you? Like, oh, I don't want to go through this paperwork process.
Well, this past summer, it was like, oh, can you declare your stocks? And I was like looking, and I didn't have any stocks, but
Yeah.
I was thinking like, oh, this is like a lot of papers, and what if I like write it wrong, and
Yeah.
then I end up on a client project for a client that's affiliated with one of the like hypothetical stocks I own, and then I get in trouble, and then
Yeah.
I get fired. Like, it's not so much the paperwork that scares me; it's so much the paper. If I do the paperwork wrong, perhaps this will end poorly for me.
Right.
So let me just not have that risk at all.
Yes, let me just buy VTI
Yeah.
or I don't know which one, XEQT or ZQT or
It's called V
VQT.
something. It's
Oh, okay.
Vanguard.
That's a Vanguard, nice.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of the way to do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think with that we're gonna wrap up today's podcast. Thanks once again, Sherry, for
Yeah, thanks for
taking
having
the
me.
time. Of course, happy to have you back in like 6 months to see what your credit card strategy kind of looks like in the future and what you've been doing with all of your points. Maybe in a couple years when you have Marriott Titanium status. And
Yeah,
you're, like,
maybe
yeah.
when I achieve that.
Yeah, that's gonna be quite a bit of fun. You can tell me all the cool hotels you stayed in.
All the upgrades.
All the
that I may
upgrades.
have gotten.
Yes, I'm expecting like a full Excel sheet.
Yeah, well, like a third of my life will be lived in hotels for the next 2 years, so it'll be great. I'll have so much to say.
Yes, I'm really looking forward to that. So yeah, with that, I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys enjoyed this like different perspective as well, because I think sometimes we get kind of caught up in the like world of course we know a lot about miles and points. So the way we think about it is very, very different to what an average individual would think about. They're not really thinking like, oh yes, I would like to optimize every single dollar of my spend. They're more like, oh yeah, it's good that I'm earning Aeroplan points, and I think I'm earning enough Aeroplan points that I don't really mind, and I don't really think it makes sense to get like 6 other credit cards to make sure every single dollar is allocated perfectly, which I think is a really good perspective, and I think it's a perspective a lot of you guys share. So we hope you guys really enjoyed this, and if you want more like this, let us know down in the comments below, and we'd be happy to get a lot more of our friends on. Yeah, with that, we'll see you next time. Take care, guys.